I don't know exactly when my marriage ended. Most people think they would know. They imagine some dramatic moment, a slammed door, divorce papers, a final argument that echoes through an empty house. But that's not how it happened. If I'm honest, I couldn't even tell you what year it died. Maybe it was the first affair. Maybe it was the second. Maybe it was the day we stopped asking each other where we've been. My wife cheated on me. Then I cheated on her. Then she found out. Then I found out that she knew. Then she found out that I knew she knew. It's amazing how many layers of knowledge can exist between two people who sleep in the same bed. For a while, we fought. The kind of fights that leave your throat raw. The kind that make neighbors close their windows. The kind where every sentence begins with "how could you?" Eventually we ran out of accusations. There are only so many times you can stab someone with the same knife. After that came silence. Not forgiveness. Not healing. Just silence. The problem was our children. Two of them. A son and a daughter. At the time, they were still young enough to run into our room after nightmares. Still young enough to believe mom and dad could fix anything. We sat at the kitchen table one night after they were asleep. Neither of us cried. Neither of us apologized. We simply discussed logistics, school districts, custody schedules, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, college funds. It felt less like ending a marriage and more like dissolving a corporation. Then she asked a question. What if we don't? I remember staring at her. What if we don't what? What if? The refrigerator hummed behind us. A dog barked somewhere outside. Life continued moving while ours stood perfectly still. The idea sounded insane. Stay together after everything? Stay after the lies? Stay after both of us had betrayed each other. Yet the longer we talked, the more reasonable it sounded. Not for us, for the kids. Just until they got older. Just a few years. Just long enough to keep their world intact. We shook hands across the kitchen table. Not husband and wife, business partners, co-parents, survivors of a disaster neither of us wanted to acknowledge. That was 12 years ago. And the strangest part? Neither of us realized that night we weren't agreeing to stay married. We were agreeing to become something far stranger. Because 3 months later, my wife introduced me to the man she was still seeing. The first time my wife introduced me to her boyfriend, she asked if I wanted another beer. That's the detail that stays with me. Not the panic, not the humiliation, not the fact that I was standing in my own backyard shaking hands with the man who was sleeping with my wife. The beer! Like she was asking whether I wanted ketchup with my fries. It happened during my son's 10th birthday party. We had rented inflatable slides. Neighbors filled the yard. Children ran through sprinklers. My daughter chased bubbles across the grass. The entire scene looked like something from a parenting magazine. A perfect family. A perfect marriage. A perfect lie. I saw him arrive through the side gate. Oh, clean cut. Confident. The kind of guy who looked comfortable everywhere. He carried a wrapped gift. My wife spotted him immediately. For a second, something flashed across her face. Fear, then acceptance, then something worse. Relief. She walked over to me. There's someone I'd like you to meet. I remember laughing. Actually laughing. Because I thought she was joking. I thought she had finally snapped. Then she introduced him. By name. Without hesitation. Without shame. Without even lowering her voice. He knew exactly who I was. I knew exactly who he was. And suddenly all three of us were standing there smiling while children screamed happily around us. Nobody else noticed. That was the moment I learned something terrifying. Human beings can adapt to absolutely anything. Even this. Especially this. The three of us talked for 20 minutes. Sports. Work. Mortgage rates. The weather. Normal conversation. Insane conversation. The distinction had already started disappearing. When he left, my wife asked me if I was okay. I said yes. And somehow I meant it. Not because I wasn't hurt. I was. Not because I wasn't angry. I was. But because anger requires the belief that something can still be repaired. By then, I wasn't sure there was anything left to repair. Months later, I started seeing someone too. A woman from work. Divorced. Smart. Funny. Complicated. My wife found out almost immediately. I expected another fight. Another explosion. Instead, she asked one question. Do the kids know? No? Okay. That was the entire conversation. No accusations. No tears. No hypocrisy. Just quality control. Over time, we developed rules. Never bring anyone home. Never miss family events. Never let the children suspect. Never make the other parent look bad. We followed those rules with a discipline neither of us had ever shown during our actual marriage. Ironically, we became better partners after destroying the relationship. Years passed. The affairs stopped feeling like affairs. The marriage stopped feeling like a marriage. Everything settled into a routine. Then one evening, while helping my daughter with homework, she smiled and said something that made my blood run cold. "I hope someday I find a marriage exactly like yours and Mom's." My daughter was 13 when she said it. "I hope someday I find a marriage exactly like yours and Mom's." I remember staring at her across the kitchen table. Math homework sat between us, a half-finished glass of milk, a pencil she kept chewing absent-mindedly. Everything looked normal, painfully normal, the kind of ordinary moment people forget 5 minutes later. But I couldn't breathe, because for the first time in years, I saw our arrangement through someone else's eyes, through hers. She wasn't seeing the lies. She wasn't seeing the affairs. She wasn't seeing the separate lives hidden behind carefully coordinated schedules. She saw two parents who never fought, two parents who attended every soccer game, every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every birthday, every holiday. She saw teamwork, stability, or at least what looked enough like love to fool a child. I wanted to tell her the truth, not all of it, just enough. Enough to warn her that what she admired wasn't real. But what would I actually say? Your mother and I stopped being husband and wife years ago. We're performing a role because we're terrified of hurting you. The family you're proud of is essentially a long-running theater production. So I smiled, I nodded, and I helped her finish her homework. That night I told my wife what our daughter had said. We were washing dishes together, like we always did, like some sitcom couple nearing their 20th anniversary. For a moment neither of us spoke. The sink water ran, plates clinked. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Then my wife laughed, not because it was funny, because it wasn't. It was the kind of laugh people make when reality becomes too absurd to process normally. "Maybe we're doing something right," she said. I looked at her. "Are we?" She didn't answer, because neither of us knew anymore. That question stayed with me for months. Were we sacrificing ourselves for our children, or were we teaching them something deeply broken? I couldn't tell. The older the kids got, the harder it became to separate truth from performance. Eventually, even I stopped knowing which version of myself was real. The husband, the father, the boyfriend, the actor. Some days I felt like all four. Some days I felt like none. Meanwhile, our friends became increasingly jealous of us. They'd compliment our communication, our patience, our maturity. They'd ask for relationship advice from us. I remember sitting beside my wife at a dinner party while another couple argued about finances. Afterward, the husband pulled me aside. He looked exhausted. "MOS, you two are the gold standard," he said. "Seriously, what's your secret?" I almost laughed in his face. Instead, I told him something vague about compromise. Then I went home and slept beside a woman who hadn't kissed me in almost 6 years. And sometime around 3 in the morning, I woke up and realized something terrifying. I couldn't remember the last time I had wanted her to, because somewhere along the way, my wife had quietly become my closest friend. The realization hit me at 3 in the morning. My wife had become my closest friend, not my lover, not my soulmate, not even, in the traditional sense, my wife. Just the person who knew me better than anyone else alive. The person I texted when something funny happened. The person who understood every family reference, every inside joke, every fear I didn't bother explaining anymore. And somehow that felt more disturbing than the affairs. Because affairs make sense. People understand affairs. Betrayal follows a recognizable script. What we had built was something else entirely. Something without a name. The next morning, I watched her make coffee, the same way she'd made coffee for nearly 20 years. 1 spoon of sugar, a splash of cream, the chipped blue mug she refused to throw away. I knew every detail. She knew every detail about me too. She knew when I was stressed before I admitted it. She knew which movies made me cry. She knew when I was lying, especially when I was lying. Sometimes I wondered if intimacy wasn't about sex at all. Maybe intimacy was simply accumulated familiarity. Enough years, enough memories, enough shared disasters. If that was true, then our marriage wasn't dead. It had mutated. That thought terrified me, because mutations don't follow rules. Around that time, my girlfriend started asking questions. Questions I'd spent years avoiding. What happens when the kids move out? What do you mean? What happens to you and your wife? I had no answer. Neither did my wife when I asked her later. We were sitting in the garage, an old habit we'd developed. Late-night conversations away from the kids, away from the illusion. The garage became the only place where honesty still existed. What do we do when they're gone? I asked. She stared at the concrete floor. I don't know. Do we divorce? Maybe. Do we stay married? Maybe. Neither answer sounded real. The truth was uglier. We had spent so many years adapting to the arrangement that we no longer knew who we'd be without it. The cage had become home. Weeks later, our son got accepted into a university 3 states away. We celebrated, took pictures, went out for dinner, acted exactly like proud parents should. Everyone was happy, except me, because for the first time, the countdown became visible, an actual deadline, an approaching end. The future we'd been postponing for over a decade was finally approaching, and I wasn't prepared. Neither was she. A few nights after the acceptance letter arrived, I woke up thirsty. I walked downstairs. The house was dark, silent. I passed the living room and noticed a light coming from the kitchen. My wife sat alone at the table, crying, not quietly, not elegantly, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere ancient, somewhere buried. I had seen her cry before, after funerals, after family tragedies, after terrible news, but never like this. She looked up and saw me standing there. Then she whispered 6 words that changed everything. I ended it with him today. For a moment, I honestly thought I had misheard her. The kitchen was dark except for the light above the stove. Shadows stretched across the floor. The clock on the microwave read 2:17 a.m. She looked exhausted. Not sad, not relieved, just exhausted. Like someone who had been carrying a heavy object for years and had finally set it down, only to realize their arms no longer knew how to rest. I sat across from her. Neither of us spoke. After 12 years, silence had become our native language. Finally, I asked, why? She laughed softly, a broken sound. Because he asked me to choose. I already knew what that meant. Choose him, leave the marriage, start over, build something real. The same conversation my own girlfriend had been trying to have with me for years. The same future both of us kept refusing to examine directly. What did you tell him? I asked. I told him I couldn't. The answer should have made me happy. Instead, it made me feel sick. Because I knew exactly what that cost. I knew how many nights she'd spent with him, how many vacations, how many conversations, how many versions of the future she had quietly imagined, and she had thrown all of it away. Not for me. That was the important part. Not for me. For the structure, for the family, for the life we'd built around our children, the artificial world we'd spent years maintaining. A few days later, I met my girlfriend for dinner. I told her what had happened. She listened quietly. Then she stared at me for a long time, long enough to make me uncomfortable. Finally, she asked a question. Do you love your wife? I opened my mouth, then closed it again, because the answer wasn't simple. I didn't love my wife the way husbands are supposed to love wives. I wasn't in love with her. I didn't dream about her. I didn't crave her. But if she disappeared tomorrow, it would feel like losing part of my nervous system. How do you explain that? How do you define a relationship that has survived the death of romance? I don't know. I finally admitted. My girlfriend nodded, almost like she'd expected that answer. Then she said something I still think about. You talk about her the way widowers talk about dead spouses. That sentence haunted me, because maybe she was right. Maybe my marriage had died years ago. Maybe my wife and I were simply 2 mourners refusing to leave the graveyard. Months passed. Our son left for college. The day we dropped him off, my wife cried the entire drive home. I understood. An entire chapter of our lives had ended. 1 child gone, 1 still remaining. The countdown growing shorter. That night, after everyone was asleep, I checked my phone. There was a message from my girlfriend. Just 1 sentence. No explanation, no warning, no anger, just a photograph attached beneath the text. The message read, I think you deserve to know who your wife has been meeting since she ended things. And when I opened the photo, I saw my wife sitting across from a man I had never seen before. I stared at the photograph for almost an hour. At first, I assumed there had to be some explanation. A coworker, a client, a relative I didn't recognize. Something ordinary, something harmless. But deep down, I already knew why my girlfriend had sent it. The picture had been taken through the window of a restaurant. My wife sat across from a man in his 50s. Gray hair, dark jacket, a face I didn't recognize. The 2 of them weren't touching. They weren't kissing. They weren't doing anything that would qualify as evidence. And somehow that made it worse. Because they looked comfortable, familiar, like people who had already shared 100 conversations, like people who no longer needed to impress each other. I recognized that look. I saw it every morning in my own kitchen. For several days, I said nothing. I carried the knowledge around like a stone in my pocket. Helvet, consent, impossible to ignore. Then one evening after dinner, I finally asked. The kids were upstairs. The television hummed quietly in the background. My wife was folding laundry. I sat beside her. Who's the guy? She froze. Not dramatically. Just enough. Just enough to confirm everything. What guy? I handed her my phone. She looked at the photo. Then she closed her eyes. No denial, no excuses, no performance, just exhaustion. Again, always exhaustion. After a long silence, she handed the phone back. His name is Daniel. I waited. She waited. Neither of us knew what rules applied anymore. Finally, I asked the obvious question. Are you seeing him? She nodded. I expected anger, jealousy, betrayal, something. Instead, I felt confused. Because we had already crossed these boundaries years ago. There were no vows left to break, no trust left to destroy. So why did this hurt? Then I realized the answer. This wasn't about another affair. This was about replacement. The previous man had belonged to the old arrangement. He had been part of the system, part of the strange balance we'd created. This was different. This was new, a new beginning, a new possibility. And possibilities are dangerous, especially when you've built your entire life around standing still. How long? I asked. 8 months. 8 months. She'd met him only a few months after ending the previous relationship. Something about that detail crushed me. Not because she'd moved on, because she still could. Meanwhile, I was drifting further and further away from my own girlfriend. The conversations had become repetitive, the future impossible, the waiting endless. But my wife, apparently, she was still capable of starting over, still capable of imagining another life. That night, I sat alone in the garage for hours, thinking, remembering, questioning things I hadn't questioned in years. Around midnight, the garage door opened. My wife walked in. She sat beside me. Neither of us spoke. Then she said something so unexpected that I genuinely wondered if I'd heard it correctly. She looked straight ahead and quietly said, I think Daniel is the first man I've ever been honest with. The words settled between us like poison. Not because they were cruel, because they were true. And truth, after enough years of pretending, becomes almost unbearable. I sat there staring at the garage wall. A bicycle hung from hooks. Boxes of Christmas decorations lined the shelves. An old lawnmower occupied the corner. The same garage where we'd spent countless nights telling each other things we couldn't say anywhere else. And suddenly, I realized how absurd that was. The only honest place in our marriage wasn't our bedroom, wasn't our kitchen, wasn't our home. It was a cluttered garage filled with forgotten junk. What does that mean? I finally asked. My wife took a long breath. I mean, he knows everything. Everything. The word hit harder than I expected, because I knew exactly what she meant. Daniel knew about the affair, the marriage, the arrangement, the lies, the children, the years, the entire impossible structure. No editing, no omissions, no performance. The full story. I told him on our second date, she said. I laughed. A short, bitter sound. Second date? Yes. And he stayed? She nodded. He said he preferred ugly truths to beautiful lies. Neither of us spoke after that. Because what exactly do you say to something like that? For years, we'd been surrounded by beautiful lies. Friends admired us. Neighbors envied us. Relatives praised us. Everyone saw a successful marriage. Meanwhile, the only person receiving the actual truth was a stranger who wasn't even part of the family. Weeks later, I ended things with my girlfriend, not because of my wife, not because I wanted reconciliation, because I was tired, profoundly tired. The relationship had become another performance, another role, another version of myself. When I told her, she didn't argue, didn't cry, didn't try to stop me. She just looked sad, not surprised, just sad. Then she asked one final question. Do you know what you're waiting for? I didn't answer, because I didn't, and that terrified me. Months passed. Our daughter entered her senior year, the last child, the final deadline. Every milestone felt different now. Every school event, every family dinner, every holiday, everything carried the strange feeling of approaching expiration, like we were actors performing the final season of a show that had run too long. One night, after a football game, my daughter posted a family photo online. The three of us smiling together, my wife on one side, me on the other, our daughter between us. Perfect. Normal. Within hours, dozens of comments appeared. People called us inspirational, relationship goals, the perfect family. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then something occurred to me. Most of those people had known us for years, some for decades, and not a single one knew who we actually were. Not one. The next morning, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it. Almost. But something made me answer. A man's voice came through the speaker. How polite. Oh there. Hi, he said. This is Daniel. I felt my stomach drop. There was a pause. Then he said the last thing I ever expected to hear. I think your wife is planning to leave you. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. I just sat in my car in the grocery store parking lot, staring through the windshield while people pushed shopping carts past me. The world continued normally. Mine didn't. Finally, I managed to ask, "Why are you telling me this?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice sounded uncomfortable, like a man stepping into a situation he never wanted to enter. "Because I don't think she's being honest with herself." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because the sentence was absurd. A stranger was calling me to discuss whether my wife was lying to herself. At some point, reality had become satire. "What exactly did she say?" I asked. "Nothing directly." "Then how do you know?" Another pause. "Because she talks about leaving every week." My grip tightened around the steering wheel. Every week. Not once. Not occasionally. Every week. For 12 years, my wife and I had maintained the same impossible structure. And apparently, for months, she'd been imagining life beyond it. A life beyond me. A life beyond us. Daniel continued. "Then every time she gets close to making a decision, she changes her mind." I closed my eyes. That sounded exactly like her. Exactly like me too. We become experts at approaching change and then retreating from it. Professionals at postponement. Olympic level avoiders of reality. "Why call me?" I asked again. This time his answer came immediately. "Because I think she's waiting for your permission." That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended. Permission. As if we were still asking each other for permission. As if we were still husband and wife. As if either of us held authority over the other's future. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. For years, every major decision had been mutual. Every sacrifice. Every compromise. Every extension of the arrangement. We had built this prison together. Maybe neither of us knew how to leave without the other's agreement. That night, I didn't confront her. I didn't mention Daniel. I didn't mention the phone call. Instead, I watched her. At dinner, while folding laundry, while helping our daughter with a scholarship application. I studied her the way people study old photographs, searching for something they'd missed. And suddenly I saw it. Not unhappiness. Not resentment. Grief. My wife looked like someone mourning a life she never got to live. The realization hit me harder than any affair ever had. Because affairs had always felt temporary, this felt permanent. A few weeks later, our daughter received acceptance letters from several universities. The house exploded with celebration. Family called. Friends visited. Pictures were taken. Champagne was opened. Everyone talked about the future. Everyone except me. Because all I could think about was what happened after she left. After our daughter moved out. After the final excuse disappeared. Late that night, I walked past the home office and noticed light under the door. My wife was inside, crying. Then she didn't notice me. She was staring at her laptop, at an email. I only saw a few lines before she closed the screen, but I saw enough. The message began with 3 words that changed everything. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. I only caught a glimpse before she slammed the laptop shut. But it was enough. Enough to see the university logo. Enough to recognize our daughter's name. Enough to understand why my wife had been crying." She looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she wiped her eyes and smiled. That automatic smile, the one we'd both perfected over the years. The smile that meant everything is fine. The smile that meant the exact opposite. "What are you doing up?" he asked. The question felt ridiculous, like asking why someone was awake during an earthquake. I stepped into the room. "What was the email?" Her smile disappeared, slowly, almost imperceptibly. Then she opened the laptop again and turned it toward me. I read it, once, then again, then a third time. Our daughter had officially committed to a university across the country. Orientation dates, housing information, financial aid documents, move-in schedules, the future, detailed and unavoidable, the final child, the final departure, the final deadline. When I looked up, my wife was crying again. Not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly breaking apart. "We did it," she whispered. I knew what she meant. We got them there. The kids, the doll, the mission, the entire reason we'd stayed. For 12 years, we'd told ourselves the arrangement was temporary. A sacrifice, a means to an end, and now the end had arrived. Yet neither of us looked relieved. We looked terrified, because somewhere along the way, the arrangement had stopped being a strategy. It had become our identity. Who was I without it? Who was she? The question hung between us, unanswered, maybe unanswerable. A week later, our daughter asked if we help her sort old family photos before she left. We spent the afternoon going through boxes in the attic. Vacations, birthdays, Christmas mornings, school plays, thousands of frozen moments, an entire life, an entire family. Looking through them felt strange, because every picture was real. The smiles weren't fake, the memories weren't fake, the laughter wasn't fake. Only the story attached to them was. Then my daughter found a photo from years ago, one I'd forgotten existed. She laughed, "Oh my god, remember this?" My wife froze. I froze. The photo had been taken at a neighborhood barbecue 12 years earlier, just a few months after we'd made our agreement. Standing in the background was a man, my wife's first affair partner, the one she'd introduced to me at our son's birthday party. My daughter pointed at him. "Whatever happened to that guy? He used to be around all the time." The room became very quiet. Then my daughter said something even stranger, something that made every hair on my body stand up. She looked back and forth between us and smiled. "You know, I always thought he was Mom's boyfriend." Nobody laughed. For a second, the entire room seemed to stop breathing. My daughter looked from me to my wife, waiting for a reaction, waiting for one of us to explain the joke. But there was no joke. Only 12 years of carefully constructed reality collapsing under a single sentence. "But I finally managed." She shrugged, completely casual, completely unaware of the grenade she'd just thrown into the room. "I mean, I was a kid, but I remember him being around all the time." My wife and I exchanged a look. The kind of look that only exists between people who have survived the same disaster. Our daughter continued flipping through photographs. "I figured you guys just had some weird adult arrangement." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Not because she knew, because she had known. Not the details, not the whole story, but enough to see what we'd spent years trying to hide. Enough to understand something neither of us had been willing to admit. Children notice far more than parents think. That night, after she went to bed, my wife and I sat in the garage one last time. The same folding chairs, the same concrete floor, the same silence. Only now there was nowhere left to hide. Our entire plan was based on protecting them, I said. She nodded, and she knew anyway. Another nod. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then my wife started laughing. Not because anything was funny, because sometimes the truth becomes so absurd that laughter is the only remaining response. Eventually, I joined her. Two exhausted people laughing in a garage at the ruins of a 12-year illusion. When the laughter stopped, neither of us looked away. For the first time in years, there was no performance, no script, no audience. Just us, the actual us. "I don't want to leave angry," she said quietly. I swallowed hard. Neither did I. The strange thing was that there wasn't any anger left. Not anymore. Time had eroded it. The affairs, the lies, the betrayals. All of it had become geological layers beneath something else. Something harder to define. Maybe friendship. Maybe loyalty. Maybe habit. Maybe love in a form neither of us recognized. Finally, I asked the question that had haunted me for over a decade. At what point does a marriage stop being a marriage? She thought about it. Really thought about it. Then she smiled sadly and gave the only answer that has ever felt true. It doesn't. I frowned. What do you mean? She looked toward the house, toward the life we'd built, toward the children we'd raised, toward the years we'd spent pretending. Then she said, "I think a marriage becomes something else long before it ends. The problem is nobody has words for what comes after." 3 months later, after our daughter left for college, my wife moved into Daniel's house. 6 months later, I signed the divorce papers. Friends were shocked. Family was devastated. Everyone kept asking the same question. What happened? Neither of us ever told them, because the truth was too strange. The truth was that our marriage hadn't survived 12 years after it died. The truth was far worse. It had evolved. And the most shocking revelation of all? The day the divorce became final, my wife was the first person I called, and she answered on the first ring. This is the end of the story. Don't forget to share with your friends, comment, like, and subscribe.